So, our title for today, out of our Ephesians series, we're in Ephesians 5. There are 6 chapters total in Ephesians, so we're getting close to the end. So, Ephesians 5 today the title is A Biblical Understanding of Marriage and Intimacy with God, out of Ephesians 5:21 to 33. So, turn to your neighbor. Almost all of you guys have a neighbor with you, okay? Find a neighbor, find a neighbor. Okay, find a neighbor. I guess the Caitlin and Jack are neighbors. Okay, this is going to be an interesting topic to talk about with your sister. But find your neighbor, okay? And I want you just to talk about it. We're not going to share. I'm not going to ask your opinion. It's fine. So I want you to ask each other, what do you think about marriage? Okay? Ready? Turn to neighbor, and share. Ready, set, go. Ayong, Marissa, together, find a neighbor. Jack, Nick, he's calling for a lifeguard. He needs your help right now. This is awkward between him and Caitlin, so he needs your help. Okay, Simon, come join this group right here. 목사님이랑 같이 하고 오세요. Oh, there you go, okay. So talk to each other. What do you think about marriage? What do you think about marriage? Okay, honest, unfiltered conversations. I'm not going to ask what you say, okay? Chisanga, ask Appa what you think about marriage, okay? And how does marriage connect to a relationship with God? Okay, so how does marriage connect to you and God? How does that connect? Is there no connection? Is there a connection? Ask each other that, okay? What do you think about marriage? How does marriage connect to your relationship with God? Okay? Okay, in the back, you two also share. What do you think about marriage? What does marriage have to do with you and God? Okay? How does that connect to relationship with God and marriage, that concept? Okay? How does marriage connect to your relationship with God? Okay? Wow. I asked that question and everyone died out, okay? Okay? You have 30 seconds to share your last final thoughts, the burning thoughts that you have. I'm going to bring us back together. Okay. So I find it interesting that a lot of you had a lot to say about marriage, or some of you didn't, but it's okay. But others of you, when I asked the question, what does marriage have to do with my relationship with God? Most of us did not have a lot to say, I think. I saw some faces like how does it connect? Like, I don't understand how it even connects. Like, marriage is marriage, and my relationship with God is this. Like, they're two separate relationships. That's how. Raise your hand if that's how you think about it. Like, marriage is marriage, relationship with God. Like, that's two separate things, okay? All right. Most of you who are not brave enough, most of you probably think that way, okay? But there's a really important connection that I want to highlight today. And I think today's message is really, really, really important, okay? So if you don't remember anything from today or like this whole year, I want you to hear this message, okay? So, marriage, relationship with God, there is a connection. I am not saying you have to be married to be close to God. That's not what I'm saying, okay? Because you can be married and have a really awful relationship with your husband and wife, and you can be married and have a really awful relationship with God. So that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying there is a mystery and a connection that I want you to be aware of out of Ephesians 5. Okay, so let's go to a very controversial verse. No. Not this verse, but this is not that controversial. This is the first verse I want us to look at. Ephesians 5:21, okay? Everybody read it together. 1, 2, 3. And further, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Okay, this is not as controversial as the next verse, okay? But I start with this verse for a very important reason. Everyone, take out your Bible app on your phone, okay? Pull out your phones, and most of you should have this Bible app. It's this like, oh no, I'm showing my screen because you can't see. It's like a brown Bible-ish looking square app, okay? Open that, and I want you to type in, go to Bible down at the bottom, okay? And type in at the top Ephesians 5, okay? So Ephesians is in the New Testament, okay? Ephesians 5. Oh my gosh, why can't I find it? Right here, okay. Ephesians 5. And scroll down to where verse 21 lands, okay? Now, depending on what version you're using, so for example, I tend to use English Standard Version, okay, ESV. If you're in the ESV, you'll notice that verse 21 comes before the section about wives and husbands. Now, if you switch the translation, so to NIV, another very popular translation, look there. Look at NIV, okay? Where does verse 21 land in the NIV? It lands with that section about husbands and wives. If you go to the NLT, which I use NLT for you guys here in our messages, New Living Translation, that also lands with the section about husbands and wives. Now, this gives you, why is this so important? You're like, this doesn't matter to me. Actually, it does, okay? Because verse 22 is often a very controversial verse, which we'll get to in a second. But so I am a proponent of believing that verse 21 goes with verse 22. Those two verses go together. We can't just say, wives submit to husbands, without first, the very, very first sentence is, and further, connected from what came before, I want you to know this. I want you to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. There's two key ideas here. Submit to one another, reverence for Christ. So submit here is the idea of putting someone else like above you, your needs, your desires, your wants. What does the word sub mean? Like in submarine. What does sub? Sub is a prefix, okay? It means going under. Good job. Nick, what am I going to do without you? Okay, so submarine, like sub under. It's saying I submit to something or someone means like that person's authority or that person's needs or that person's desires come before mine. That's what submit looks like. But what's interesting is verse 21 says submit to one another. So look to your neighbor. Look to your neighbor you talk to. Look to them. Look them in the eye. See how pretty they are, okay? Submit to one another. So each of you is like, okay, I'm going to like submit my thoughts and my desires and put yours above mine. And that person's like, no, I'm going to put yours above mine. I'm going to put yours above mine. Okay, we have a lot more peace that way, hopefully. Or, like the idea is we submit to one another, which is totally opposite of what the world tells us to do. The world tells you, you get ahead, you lead, everyone else will follow, like you're the best, okay? But does that really create for healthy relationships all the time? Not really. Maybe in some workplaces that works, but does that create a healthy mutual relationship? Not usually. If one person is always leading all the time and the other person just follows and that's it for their whole lives, that's not really a healthy relationship. Even with kids, all of you guys who you have parents, right? At some point, my child now is 5, so he does listen to me and he better, okay? But there will come a time when he's 15 or 25 when I do not expect him to listen to me and obey me like when he was 5. Right? We're going to have more of a mutual type of relationship the older he gets, hopefully, okay? In the same way, like these relationships change. Like they only work when they work mutually. But here's another really important point. It's saying, why do we submit to one another? Why do we do that? Is it because Korean people are really good at this? You know what they're really good at? You know the ajumma friend? Your mom has an ajumma friend, right? Okay? Your ajumma friend's like, oh, your son is so smart. He goes to the best. He's so great, so handsome. And what does your mom say? What does she say? Is she like, oh, yes, my son's amazing? Is that what she says? No. What does she say? She goes, oh, Anya, he's not that smart. Oh, your son's so much smarter than my son, right? That's what all Korean parents do, okay? And when you're a kid, you're like, can you just stand up for me? I am pretty amazing, right? Like I think every second-generation kid goes through that, okay? But the point is, there's a lot of false humility in Korean culture, which is like not really like beneficial, okay? So Paul's not saying be falsely humble and submit to each other just to save face. That's not what he's saying. He's saying submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. We do it because of Jesus. How many of you have done things for somebody because you're using your head and you're like, if I help that person, they will help me? Okay, right? Most of us do all the time. And when you do that, are you really, really trying to serve that person? You're serving yourself, right? And all of us do that. All of us have done that, right? That's not what Paul's saying. Paul's saying you do this, you submit to each other, not because that person deserves it. Most of the time, that person does not deserve to be listened to. That person does not know what they're talking about. But why do we do it? out of reverence for Christ. And this is a theme you'll see all throughout this passage. We do this not because that person's worthy, not because they're the most amazing and handsome person in the world. We do it because we love Jesus, and that's what he calls us to. Okay? So out of reverence for Christ, because of Jesus, I do this. So I want to sum up this verse. We'll put it on the screen. This is the main idea of this verse, okay? And it's this. Can I have it on the back too? It's this. We all are called, all of us, no exceptions, to mutually submit to one another, putting others before ourselves because of Jesus. All of us are called to submit to each other because of Jesus. That's our first main idea. Now, let's get to verse 22. This is a very controversial verse, okay? This is the verse. For wives, so again, connects to verse 21. Both of you submit to each other. Now, here are some more specifics. For wives, this means submit to your husbands as to the Lord. For a husband is the head of his wife, as Christ is the head of the church. As the church submits to Christ, so you wives should submit to your husbands. Now, again, this is a very controversial verse, okay? I could speak about this for many, many years. Like, there's so much commentary, so many things out there. Even among the church, pastors, you ask them all different questions, they will all have different opinions about this verse, okay? So I do not think I'm smart enough to figure it all out with you guys, but I will lay down some ideas here. So I borrowed from this person, David Guzik. He has a big commentary online, and there's this really great quote that I really appreciated. So he explains this verse in this way. Can I have that quote on the screen too? Okay, ready? I'll just read it for you guys. Oh, can you put it back? Okay. It goes, submission does not mean inferiority, okay? As well, submission does not mean silence. Submission means under, mission. There is a mission for the Christian marriage, and that mission is obeying and glorifying who? God, okay? The wife says, I'm going to put myself under that mission. That mission is more important than my individual desires. I'm not putting myself below my husband. I'm putting myself below the mission that God has for our marriage and for our lives. I really like that, what he said there. Because I think that's true. We often take the word submit and we're like, oh, cringe, like what the heck, no. Especially in our society that's very feminist, and there are pros and cons to all of those movements, okay? And the point being that this idea of submission is not just silence. It's not inferiority. It's not just going along with what the man says. It's not just falling into abuse cycles. It's not any of those things. It's not having a voice. It's not having leader. It's not any of those things. It's saying, I submit to the mission that God has for my marriage and for my life. Because God has a plan for my mission, for my life, for my relationship with my husband, for the kids that we might have one day. That's a mission that God has upon my life, and I submit to that mission. That's what that concept is about. So who is this directed to? Okay, wives. It says for wives. Now, this is important. Who does it say to submit to? Does it say submit to all men? No, it says to husbands, okay? So this is within the home, right? So a lot of times people will say things like women cannot be in leadership, in politics, or education, or da-da-da-da, all these kind of things. Okay, that's not, and they'll use this verse, and I'm like, dude, that's super out of context, because this is saying wives and husbands within the home. Okay? This is not talking about women can't be in leadership, period. Okay? I'm telling you these things because people will use these kinds of things when they talk to you, okay? And that's not true. Look at the context. It's not just to all men in society. It's specifically within the home. Now, there's another piece that often gets really misinterpreted and really misused, and it's that second part where it says, for wives must submit to husbands as to the Lord. As to the Lord. That's been really misused a lot, okay? There's two ways it's been misused. It is not saying that your husband is God, because he ain't, okay? It's not saying that. It's not saying submit to your husband as to the Lord, like he's God, so he and God, same thing, you better submit to him. That's not what it's saying, okay? There are boundaries to which we all submit. Think about it, your teachers, okay? Now, nowadays, I feel really bad for teachers. I feel like students can get really mean. But the point is, they are your teachers, right? They're your teachers, so you probably should listen to them. But will you listen to them to the point that goes beyond their, boundaries? Like, we've all heard of those crazy stories of, abuse, right? Like, that's not listening to your teacher. That's beyond their boundary, okay? Or even parents and children, parents who abuse their children emotionally, physically, sexually, mentally, emotionally. That's going beyond they should not be doing that, right? Like, even within obvious relationships, like husband and wife, pastors and church members, there's obviously clear boundaries to which that authority, has limits, right? We've all seen, when we see power unchecked, authority unchecked, that's when bad things happen, okay? So even within authority and submission, there are boundaries, healthy boundaries that God puts in place. Even among husbands and wives, there are boundaries, healthy boundaries that are in place. Even though God says submit, he's saying within a healthy boundary. Because the only person we can totally and completely trust when we submit is to God. That's the only person. The only person in the entire world, in your entire life, that has authority over you, the only one you can totally trust is God. That's it. Every other authority figure in your life has a boundary, a healthy boundary, that both must keep at all times. And so your husband is not God, okay? Men, you are not God. The sooner you, I was looking at Jack, just kidding. All of you men right here, all of you men, you are not God, okay? Now, number 2, this goes to the wives, to the women in your life, okay? Women, we've also interpreted this the wrong way of saying, I'll submit to him as long as he does what God says is good. And then we women are like, I'm going to define what that is, okay? I have done that, all right? It's not healthy. Because you know what? I'm not God either. I'm not God. I can't define, God did not say that, husband, so you better back off, okay? Sometimes maybe, but the point is, okay, I am not God either. I'm not God, so I can't define what that is. Now, together we can figure it out, but I can't be like, I'm not going to listen to him today because that's not what God said. Okay, that is called pride. Women, all of us have done that, okay? We can't do that either. Those are 2 ways that's been very, very misinterpreted, okay? This doesn't have to do with personality. It does not have to do with whether or not the husband or wife deserves to be listened to. That's not the point. Because you know what? If we just did relationships because that person deserved it, nobody would be in a relationship because nobody deserves love and respect and all these things. We've all failed somewhere. The point is, it's not about who's right or who's wrong. It's about what God has ordained. What has God said? What are the healthy boundaries? Because he's put healthy boundaries in place in all of our lives to help us for our good. And so the more I know what those boundaries are, the more I don't get lost by somebody else telling me this is the boundary when it's not. The idea of headship we see in this verse. We're going to go into more. But it's the idea of not just, I'm the head. Okay, who's seen My Big Fat Greek Wedding? It's a really old movie, okay? It's really old. It's one of my favorites. But in the movie, it's this big Greek family, and the dad is the patriarch. He's and then the main lead character, she's single and older and trying to find a husband, and she must marry a Greek guy, but she just doesn't really want to. And in this scene, she wants to go to college, and her dad's no. And she's really sad, and her mom goes to her, and she's like, honey. And the dad ends with I'm the man of the house, and that's how he leaves. And the mom goes, honey, your dad is the man of the house, but what's under the head is the neck. And the neck can turn the head any which way it wants. And women are the necks. And that's often what I think about, but that's not always true. But the point is, headship is more than just I'm the boss. That's not what headship is. True headship is you have the authority and the responsibility to carry out that headship well in your family. Okay, men, you're not just I'm the man, I'm the head of the house, I do whatever I want. That's not headship. That's not headship. True headship is you have the authority and the accountability and the responsibility to steward your family well before God. That's what headship is. It's a heavy calling. It's not easy to do. You cannot do it by yourself. You cannot do it by your own strength. That's what headship is. But when we live that way, we want to follow people like that. People where I'm like, see, that person is not just about them. That person is about us, wanting us as a family to grow. That's what I want. And so we sum up this idea, this passage, this often controversial topic with this main idea, our second main idea, number 2, which we have on the board here. It's this. Women are called to notice how I put submission, how said it, okay? To put ourselves under the mission of God for our marriages, for our lives, and, not to put themselves as inferior to the men in their lives, okay? You don't have to be married for this to apply to you. You could be single and this still applies to you. As a woman, I want to ask you, how are you putting your life under the mission of God? As a single person, as a teenager, as a child, as whatever it is, like, how are you putting your life under the mission of God? How are you viewing him like, I want to know what God's purpose is for my life. I want to live out the greatest calling of God in my life. That's what you should be asking yourself right now. As women, at all different stages, in all different relationships, that's the primary focus of our lives. Not just like, oh, when is my husband going to change? Or like, when am I going to find my husband? When am I not? Like, whatever. Like, those things are important. But the idea is this. If we don't know how to put our lives under God now, what makes us think that when we get married, we're going to magically be able to do that? It's not how it works. So women, I want you to ask yourself, how are you putting your life, and men, this goes for both, how are we putting our lives under the mission of God, believing and knowing and wanting what he wants for our lives? Let's go to the next set of verses. Now, husbands, I didn't leave you men out. Verse 25, here we go. Verse 25, it says this. For husbands, this means, love your wives just as Christ loved the church. He gave up his life for her. He did this to present her to himself as a glorious church without a spot or wrinkle or any other blemish. Now, it says here specifically wives are to submit to the mission of God, but I think men have it harder actually, because you're called to die. That's what men are called to do, is you're called to die. Die to yourself, die to what you want. See, that idea of you are to love them, not just love them. He didn't stop there. If he was like, love them, interpret that however you want. That would wreak havoc. But he gives a disclaimer. This is what love looks like. Just as Christ died for the church, that's how you're called to love your wives. Protect the women in your life. Husbands are to love like Christ loved the church. I think that's harder, actually. So what are husbands called to do? They're called to love. Now, in this New Testament passage in Ephesians, it's written in Greek, okay? Who knows Greek? I don't know Greek. Okay, Greek. So, you know, like in Spanish, who knows Spanish a little bit from school? Okay, so you know the word to know, or the verb to know? Isn't there 2 different verbs for that? Saber and conocer, right? Saber and conocer, okay. So saber is the one where you know with your head, right? Conocer is the one where you know with, like, you know, people, okay? So that's, like, really helpful. There's, like, multiple words for the same word. Same thing with Greek and love. There are 4 different words for love in Greek, okay? The first one is eros, so passion. What we often think about is in the movies, okay? Like all the sexy scenes, okay? That's eros, okay? And then there's also, what's the other one? Storge? I'm going to say it wrong, okay? That's family love. Clearly, you don't have the same kind of eros love for your family that you do for, like, your husband or wife or your boyfriend, right? Like, it's different, okay? So that kind of family love. And then there's philia love, which is like friendship, affection, okay? And then there's the last kind of love, which is agape love. And agape love is unconditional love by choice. It's not feelings. It's not any of those things. It's choice. Now, take a wild guess. Which of those 4 words did Paul use when he said, husbands, love your wives? Agape. Agape. He's not saying, husbands, love your wives when she looks real fine, okay? It's not saying, husbands, love your wives because of this. It's saying, husbands, love your wives. Choose to love them no matter what. That's what he's calling you to do. And he's saying this. Paul is not saying, don't have a passionless marriage, don't have friendship. No. Paul's assuming all of those other things are already there, okay? Because most of the time, trust me, you can't be married to someone if you don't find them attractive. If you don't like them as a person, you can't spend much time with them, okay? Like, if you don't think your future person to be is like a great friend to you, it's not going to last very long, okay? So those things are already going to be there. But are you always like best friends in your marriage? No, okay? Are you always like, oh, I think you're so great, you're so hot? No, okay? Like, you don't think that way. Those things die off eventually, okay? So then what's left? What's left is agape. What's left is choice. Love means choosing to love that person you have said yes to because that's what God calls you to. Now, love like Christ loved. Do you know how Christ loved? Do you know how Jesus loved? Take a good look at how he loved. Did he love people because they deserved it? Did he love them because they received him well? Did they love him because he gave them lots of money? No, like he loved the people no matter what their response was. He loved them to the point that they nailed him to a cross, okay? So that's the extent to which you and I are called to love the people in our lives. I like this other quote that the same guy, David Guzik, says. Let's put up that quote, where it talks about this. Like leadership, husbands, okay, it's saying worldly leadership says, I'm the head, so you take orders from me, okay, because I'm the boss. That's what the world says. But what God says is, I love this part. It says, God says, I am your head, so I must care for you and serve you. I must care for you and serve you. That's what headship looks like. Not I'm the boss, you listen to me, but I'm the head. I am responsible and accountable, and so I must care for you and serve you. Worldly submission, so to wives it says, the world says, you must submit to me, so here are the things I want you to do for me. Here's what you owe me, because I'm the one in charge and you have to do this for me. But godly submission says, you must submit to me, so I'm accountable before God for you. I must care for you and serve you. It's a very different kind. Do you see how drastically different God's calling for marriage is than what the world says? Nowadays, they say, I think with Gen Z, most of Gen Z doesn't want to get married anymore right now. Well, first of all, most of you are probably too young to really think seriously about marriage anyway, but that mindset does carry forward as you get older, you know? Like marriage is becoming less and less a thing. Like maybe cohabitation's rising a lot more. Like marriage is like, what's the point of this, okay? And that is the reality of the world that we live in. And yet, I think it's so critical. When I was preparing this, I was like, it could go like 15 different ways how I could take this. And I was like, do I sound really old school saying these things and whatever else? But I really realized, you know what? If you don't hear it from here, if you don't hear it from this place right here, okay? If you don't hear it from here, you're not going to hear it from the world, how God defines marriage. You're not. But he's the first one who created and designed marriage. So I'm pretty sure how he created it and designed it is probably pretty good, okay? If you don't hear it from here, I was like, you know what? You might not hear it anywhere. And so I'm taking the chance and the risk because I asked all of you earlier, what do you think about marriage? Maybe half of you are like, it sucks. Everyone makes it look awful. Maybe that's your opinion. That's fine. You can have your opinion. And yet there's still biblical truth, no matter what your opinion is, right? Like there's still truth. And you need to know that. And so here we are. In verse 28, it says this. So he actually keeps going more about husbands. He says this, in the same way husbands ought to love their wives. Okay, so love like Jesus loved. But he's like, maybe that's too abstract. So let me give you a good example. Love as if love your wives as your own bodies. For a man who loves his wife actually shows love for himself. No one hates his own body, but feeds and cares for it, just as Christ cares for the church. If you broke your leg, okay, who's broken a bone before? Okay. Who's not broken anything their whole lives? Y'all be careful when you walk out today. Okay, the point is though, like I have never broken anything and I'm scared because I think when you're a kid and you break things, like they're flexible, so like they kind of glue back together fast. But when you're like my age and older, you're like, oh, that hurts really bad. Okay, the point being, if I broke my arm or my leg and there was like bone sticking out, okay, and like my leg is like a weird angle, okay, and I'm like, it's okay. Like, it'll probably fix itself. And I'm like bleeding and like can't go. Okay, like, does that make any sense? Like, what person is that dumb who's gonna do that? I'm gonna be like freaking out. Like, call 911, like, do something, okay? All of you, if your bodies are broken, you will do something about it. most of the time, okay? In the same way, Paul is saying, hey, men in your lives, love the women in your lives like you love your own body. You care for your own body, okay? How many of you guys know some guys in your life who take much longer to shower or much longer to get ready than you do, okay? I know quite a few, and I'm just like, why? No one cares, man. But the point is, like, that's good. Take care of your body, and it's saying that's how you treat your wives in your life. The opposite is true. If you neglect your wife, you're neglecting your body. You're walking around with a broken leg saying it's okay. So to sum up this idea with husbands, let's pull up that third idea. We have 4 total. This third idea is this. Husbands are called to agape love their wives, to choose to love them as they love and take care of their own bodies. Now, the men in this room, okay? You might be single, dating, married, whatever you're at. You might be like, I'm just 12, okay? Whatever it is. Like, men in this room, how are you choosing to love the women in your life? Okay? Because there is this common saying. When you're dating, everyone tells you this. When you find someone real cute, you like him, look at how he treats his mom, look at how he treats his sisters, and the women in his life. Because that's how he'll treat you one day. It's very true. Okay? So men, in this stage, whether or not you get married, doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is God is calling us to this kind of level of relationship. Does that make sense? Submit to one another. Put someone else above your needs. How are you treating those people in your life? Because that's what he's, a different standard. Our last passage for today. Nope, second to last. Ephesians 5:31. As the scriptures say, a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. This is a great mystery of marriage, but it is an illustration of the way Christ and the church are one. This is the connection I want to make now between marriage and our relationship with God. Because as much as people like bag about marriage nowadays, marriage is probably the closest thing we have to understanding true and deep intimacy. True and deep intimacy. Marriage is one of the closest relationships. Now, parent-child is also very intimate also. Like, women in here, if you ever given birth, that is the pretty intimate experience, okay? You can't get less intimate than that, all right? But the point being, like, that's one-sided, though, right? Like, it's the mother who experiences that. The child being born doesn't understand what happened to him or her, okay? But with marriage, you have this mutual, like, between men and women, this relationship that you can't get deeper than that. You really can't. Like, to know someone in every aspect, all their good, all their bad, everything, and to still choose them. There's something really powerful about that. And that is the closest thing we get to understanding what it's like to be with God. God saying, I know everything about you, all the good, all the bad, and I still choose you. Do you see the connection? When we have broken images of marriage in our lives, whether our parents had a very broken marriage or we've had broken relationships with like trauma or abuse from men and women in our lives, whatever it may be, when there's a broken understanding of what that relationship should look like, it's really hard for us to think about a God who could love us and not take advantage of us, or love us and not abuse us, or love us or not abandon us. There's often a very strong connection between those two. And think about it. Like, for a person like my son who's 5, right? He looks at his dad, and his dad looks so tall and, like, so great, you know? And then, like, that's his closest first understanding to an idea of a God who can be a father, who can protect him. Like, that's his first concept. Does that make sense? Like, all of us too, like, our first concepts of parents or our marriages or those things, that sticks with us, and that's how we translate to God. And often there's a disconnect there. And that's why today's message is so important. He's saying, this is what marriage should look like. Regardless of your current marriage or regardless of your parents' marriages, sometimes they're broken because we're human. But the point is, this is what it should look like. Because when you understand this, it translates to this with me and you. A God who's saying, I totally know all of who you are, and you can trust me when it says to submit to me, because I have headship over you, and I will care for you, and I will love you and be accountable to you. So will you just love me? Does that make sense, that transition? And so This is the idea, to sum up the idea of marriage here. Our last idea is this. Marriage is two people becoming one. And it's a mystery meant to point us to a greater, intimate relationship with Jesus. And so, when you think about that, have you ever thought of your relationship with God being like a marriage? Like, it's not actually like a marriage, okay? There are some weird people out there. Don't believe that, okay? It's not like, it's like the idea of marriage, of intimacy, of choosing one person, loving one person. Have you ever connected that to God and you? Our last verse 33, it says this. So again, I say, each man must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Here's the takeaway. Each man called to love his wife as himself. Each wife called to respect her husband. You know what's interesting? Every wife wants their husband to do those things. Every husband wants their wives to do those things. But here's the thing. As long as each of you do those things, then you're good, right? Like, we want the other person to take care of us. But the thing is, if you just do your part the way you're supposed to, and that person does their part the way they're supposed to, it will work out, okay? And that's the point. That's what a healthy relationship and marriage looks like. And so, I want to connect that to our theme for this year, because our theme for this year is in Christ. In Christ. This kind of intimate relationship that we have with Christ. One of the ways we can understand that is through a healthy understanding of marriage. I want you guys to know, like, I really believe that Satan hates marriage a lot. Like, that's the thing he hates the most, one of the things he hates the most. Because you know what's the most powerful thing in God's family is a man and a woman who know what they've been called to do, who know, like, the biblical view of marriage, and they raise their family in that way. That's one of the most powerful weapons against the enemy. And so Satan has done everything he can in our society to break down marriage, to break down our experiences with them, to break down relationships, to break down sexuality, all of these things that are such a beautiful picture of what it means to, like, live out a healthy relationship with God. He's trying to break all those things down. And so today, as we go through our questions, which will go on the board, our screen right now, these are our questions. And these are really important. Did I send these out to you guys? Did I send that to that group? I did? Okay, good. This, again, you can read through that, but these are important questions that I want you guys to ask yourselves, okay? Because if you don't ask yourself this now, no one's going to sit with you. I mean, hopefully someone does, but people won't sit with you like, what is your healthy view of biblical marriage? No one's going to ask you that, okay? Like, unless I ask you to ask yourself that question, okay? So please, I want you guys to take this seriously. Well, maybe you're like, I don't want to be married. That's okay. That's fine too. But you're still a person with people in your life. And so how will you love and treat those people the way God's called us to? Can I have the praise team come up? You know how I said earlier that connection between a healthy view of marriage and a healthy view of relationship with God, those are connected. They're connected together. And I really think that for all of us, no one is unscathed. Nobody is like, oh, I have the most perfect understanding of God and the most perfect, my parents are amazing and they're perfect and they're wonderful. And maybe they really are, and that's great. But nobody is like, oh yeah, I've never had a bad experience with a relationship, or I've never had a bad experience of not being loved. Like, everybody has something in their lives where that beautiful picture of what God designed was broken, a little bit at least. All of us do. And if we're not careful, we'll take those broken images and we'll place them on God and say, well, how can I get deeper with God? How can I really trust him when the people in my life haven't done the same? And so I want us to sing this song. Can we all stand together? The song is Reckless Love. And it really talks about how reckless God's love is. It doesn't make any sense. How could he love us that much? You guys, today's cloudy. It's still cloudy, right? Outside, okay? Does that mean the sun does not exist? Does that mean the sun is not shining above those clouds? My kid can go out and he's like, the sun doesn't exist because the clouds are here and there's no sun today. No, that's not true, right? Like, we all know above those clouds, the sun is still shining. In the same way, whether or not you feel his love or know his love, it is there. It's always there. It's never been gone. Maybe you and I have just been focused on the clouds so much that we don't know that there's light beyond those clouds. That love of God is there. Because ultimately, today's message is about love. It's about understanding the invitation God has given you of, yes, I've saved you. For what? Just to kind of live this marginal life? No. God has saved us and invited us and said, you are a part of my family. Now I want you and I to restore that relationship that was broken in Eden between man and God, woman and God, that was broken in the garden. That paradise that he created for human beings, that brokenness, he's inviting us back into the garden saying, hey, come back to me. Come back to know me. And that's only known when you know his love. And so, let's sing this song together, and we're going to pray.
Spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me. Before I took a breath, you breathed your life in me. So, so kind to me. How the overwhelming, never-ending, reckless love of God. How it chases me down, fights till
thought about like choosing to love being a way of understanding how God chooses us. Whatever it is that you've been convicted of in your life, whether it's the relationships you're in right now or whatever it may be, I want you to pray in response to that and say, God, help me to be the kind of person you call me to be, to submit my life to you first and foremost, to lead and love and serve those around me because you've called me to. Whatever it is, maybe it's you've realized these broken views you have of marriage because of your past or because of what you've experienced. Bring that to God and say, God, would you restore? Would you heal that? Would you help me to see those things differently, to see you differently? Let's pray right now in response to whatever it is that God's touched your heart with. Let's pray together right now. Yes, Jesus.
Before I spoke a word, you were singing over me. You have been so, so good to me.
God, thank you for your goodness. Just as the sun always shines, whether or not there are clouds to cover it, your love, your goodness has always been over us. And so, God, we declare that even in the moments that we've experienced our own brokenness, or we've experienced marriage and the way you designed it being broken, or the ways that we have broken that in our own lives. God, I ask that you would restore hearts today. God, show us how important it is, your design, who you've called us to be, to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. That as we do that, Lord, you will restore hearts to understand the beauty of what you've called us to with intimacy in marriage and intimacy with you, Lord. So God, we thank you. And I ask even now that you would continue that work beyond this room, beyond today. Whether we're single, dating, engaged, married, wherever we are in the spectrum, Lord, that you would restore our hearts to understand you more, your love more. We love you. We pray all these things in your son's precious name.